Good morning. Thank you, everyone. If you take your seats, we're going to try to keep this moving. I'm Jeffrey Goldberg from The Atlantic. I'm a national correspondent at The Atlantic, and I want to welcome all of you again to this very important conference. At The Atlantic, I cover two main subject areas. U.S. foreign policy is one, and Mitch Landrieu is the other. That's what it seems like lately, at least. And so I'm very glad that we have the mayor with us. He obviously needs no introduction, so I want to jump right into this conversation. And since I have you on the couch, I thought I would ask kind of a shrink question.
All right.
If you want to lie down, please go. Feel free to relax.
There's no time to lie down.
So I want to take you back 10 years, and I want to talk about how you felt exactly 10 years ago. I'm trying to imagine this. I'm trying to picture this. You're a lieutenant governor. You're in helicopters. You're in boats. You come to your city. 80% of it is underwater. People are dying at intolerable levels, completely intolerable levels. Did it ever cross your mind? Did you ever feel like maybe this was simply too big? That maybe the city could not, no city could come back from this level of devastation?
No. I never, for 1 second, and I don't think most people in New Orleans felt anything other than we were 100% sure that somehow, some way, our city was going to come back. Because all of us, which is just weird about this whole tragedy, is that not only was an institutional failure, we didn't really see ourselves as being whatever we were at the time. Everybody in here got hurt. And so the first responders were hurt too. It wasn't like somebody else got hurt and the first responders were coming in. We all lost pretty much everything in some form or fashion. And it literally never occurred to me that anything other than the city coming back would eventually be where we got.
But you heard national politicians, the Speaker of the House at the time.
To be honest with me, it really that angered me about more than anything else. It was a visceral, angry response, number one. But the intellectual response was, that's just insane. Who in their right mind thinks the city of New Orleans is not coming back? I mean, we've had hurricanes, since the beginning of our time, and this one was worse, and it was awful, and it was terrible. But just as a New Orleanian, my sense of what everybody else felt was, hell no. We're coming back. Yeah. And just the rage at that comment and the stupid comments that people around this country made, I think gave the people of New Orleans a much greater sense, a much greater purpose. And we were like, hell no, we're coming back. That's our home, and we're going to get there no matter what it takes.
So thank you, Denny Hastert, for motivating you, huh?
Well, he wasn't the only one, yeah. But
he was a big one. Let me jump to today and ask you a question. If, God forbid, the same exact type of storm hit this city, hit this coast next week, what would New Orleans look like after that storm?
Well, first of all, the country has a hard time understanding this, but we are the veterans of lots of storms. They come in, they go out. Betsy was a big storm. Camille was a big storm. The thing that the people of New Orleans want the people of America to know was that this was not a natural disaster. This was a man-made disaster. This happened, what happened to New Orleans happened because the levees broke. Now, this is just really interesting because Mississippi got the wind. They got what the normal kind of terrible storm is. We then got the water. It was an infrastructure failure, which is why you hear me say a lot that New Orleans is this nation's canary in the coal mine. Things that have happened in New Orleans, just like the discussion that we had just a minute ago about income inequality, the very difficult things that we're all suffering through, there are things in this nation that have been going on for a long period of time. And the people in New Orleans want everybody to know that today we are stronger. We have $14.6 billion of levee investments, the levee's stronger and bigger. Now, it's only built to Category 3. We believe it should be built to Category 5. Be that as it may, if that storm came in the same exact way and the levees did not breach, which we expected they wouldn't this time about that storm if it hit exactly the same way, nobody in their right mind would say that anybody in any city has a 100% guarantee that you're not going to get hurt. So that's what the whole resilience effort is about, rebuilding the coast, not letting it deteriorate, an existential threat for the city, making sure that the levees are strong, making sure that the buildings that we built are built the right way, and then and consistent with the previous panels, making sure that our communities are resilient and strong so that we can actually sustain bad things that we know are going to come our way. Because whether it's a terrorist attack, whether it's a hurricane, whether it's an earthquake, whether it's a heat wave that comes in, communities have to find a way to get stronger. And Katrina showed us that we weren't as ready as we think we should be, and we've got a lot more work to do.
You talk a lot about gratitude. You're talking gratitude in the weeks running up to this, and you'll be talking a lot about it this week. But you want better levees. You want a better storm protection system. And tell me very specifically why that hasn't happened.
Well, the money. I mean, that's the specific answer, and the will on behalf of Congress. One of the things, and I'm speaking to the choir in this room, this city and the Gulf Coast produces about 35% of this nation's oil and gas, which is to say that we are the tip of the spear for this nation's in protecting our national security, because that's what energy independence gives us. That's why we're important. And years before the storm, we kept begging people to pay attention to us, but they wouldn't. And then Katrina hit, and they said, oh, man, something really big is happening down there, and that's why they're important, which is to say that if you want this city to survive, you've got to make sure you protect it, because by protecting us, you're protecting America. That's why the investment's necessary. Now, the levee system is better than it was before. It's stronger than it was before. It was an engineering failure by the federal government. Be that as it may, I think there's still a discussion going on amongst the engineers that if you really wanted to get to a place where you could actually resist risk more, it would be a Category 5, Category 5 storm protection. But that is a discussion that's ongoing. It's a big battle that we continue to have about restoring the coast and the levees, and it's a battle that we have half won, but you got to get to the other part, and that's a long discussion for another day.
Let's talk about the way that the city has changed over the past 10 years. One of the things, and you heard this on the first panel, and one of the things people talk about is that in many ways it's a richer city. It's also a whiter city than it used to be. 80,000 to 100,000 black residents are gone. What are you going to do, or what do you want to do to bring back that population?
Well, first of all, I hope everybody comes home. Earlier this week I traveled to Houston and Atlanta because those two cities are housing the most of our residents that decided not to come back. So just very quickly to my brothers and sisters in New Orleans, this week is designed really to do three things. One is to remember all of our family members that we lost. Terrible stories of personal tragedy that we continue to know about personally, that we participated in, or that we're reading in the paper. Fathers actually letting the hands of their daughters go, and it's going to be hard to relive that, but we are here to remember. Secondly is to thank the rest of the world and all of our friends and neighbors from across the country and friends and neighbors in our neighborhoods for helping us lift up and expressing gratitude to cities that took us in. 32 cities actually received our people, made sure our kids got in school, made sure we had a roof over our head, made sure that we got dry before we had the chance to come home, and in some instances have kept them. And so I think it's very important for us in New Orleans to just spend a moment, instead of thinking about how far we have to go, just being thankful for being alive today and being able to have a second chance for another day. And then the third is what I think is just a miraculous thing that the people of New Orleans have done. When you have a near-death experience, either personally or institutionally, all you want to do is get back to where you were the day before the bad thing happened. You just want it to go away. You don't want to think about it. The people of New Orleans actually spent a minute and I think did something that was amazing by being honest. And Katrina and Rita did not cause all of our problems. A lot of the discussions that we're having today with problems that were here well before the storm, right? And they are issues that are just kind of coursing through the presidential debate right now, whether they're being evidenced by the Tea Party on the right or the folks that are showing up, at Zuccotti Park or et cetera. And I think there's uneasiness around the country on all the issues of income inequality. It is true that this city has changed somewhat, but this city is still 60% African American. It is a majority minority city. We have had an influx of Hispanic brothers and sisters that stormed into this city and to help us rebuild, and I'm thankful for them too. The Caucasian population is about 32%, so 60% African American, 32% white, and then other, and the other is Hispanic, Vietnamese, and in a sense. So this has always been a very diverse city. We've never seen ourselves in the racial terms of being white or black people in New Orleans are different in the sense that we always know and believe that diversity is a strength, not a weakness. However, we still have the same fissures that every other community has. And so what we're doing in the city as we rebuild is to make sure that everybody is welcome, make sure that everybody knows that they have a stake in this game, make sure that we don't sweep anything under the rug about what the difficulties are going forward. So Oliver Thomas, who was here a little while ago, who was in the water with me 10 years ago, said 52% of African-American men are not working. That's an unacceptable number. But people in New Orleans who don't get out and get around much will know that if you ask the same question in cities like Baltimore, in Oakland, in Compton, et cetera, the whole Black Lives Matter movement is around the issue of what are we doing to help disadvantaged communities get back to where they're going. So what we're trying to do in the city is take the time to rebuild the institutions and make them strong so that people can have the opportunities to do better. That's why we're reconstructing the healthcare delivery system. That's why we're trying to restructure education system, which is a source of some concern for some folks, so that people can have the opportunities to build generational wealth and have strong foundations to stand on.
Let me stay on this subject for a minute and press you on this a little bit. Well, first, our mutual friend Lolis Eli just said that one of the problems he diagnoses is that we tend to judge the success of a city's comeback, a city like New Orleans' comeback, based on how rich the rich are getting. So I want to ask you if you agree with that, if that is the metric that people are applying to New Orleans. And two, let me stay on this issue of what specifically you're doing to make, for instance, housing affordable so that the African-American, mainly African-American populations that are in Houston and Atlanta now have a way to get back here.
Well, one thing I noticed, I watched the panel, and everybody on that panel was my friend, and all of them have been great, passionate advocates for the city of New Orleans and speak the truth. But it was just really interesting to listen to it because we have a sense now, we're kind of getting back into what was normal before. And the normal before was an impatience for what is, hoping for what should be could get here quicker. It actually takes time to rebuild institutions so that human beings can actually take advantage of the institutions and then continue over generations to do better. And these two things are crisscrossing right now and creating dissension. I don't think anybody can argue, for example, that the physical school buildings, the $1.8 billion that have been invested, are giving our children much better physical facilities to go into. Just Wilson Elementary, everybody in this room can name all of them. There used to be stories across the press about the bathrooms being not habitable in our public schools. That whole new thing is much better and much different. What's going on in the schools, all right, is right now, based on numbers, producing higher graduation rates, lower dropout rates. What Lolis mentioned earlier before was a very serious problem with actually who's teaching in the schools and what that all looks like. And there are all kinds of ramifications, and that is true. But if folks in the city can just remember, in 1960, this city had 680,000 people in it. We were bigger than Houston, we were bigger than Atlanta. From around 1955 to 1960, the population started going down. The night before the storm, it was down to 465,000 people. Then the storm hit and everybody went out fast. Now we're the fastest growing city in America. So cities have problems. Some problems that they have is you're shrinking, you have a shrinking tax base, nobody's making money, everybody's stressed. That's a problem to be worked through. Then other cities have problems. Now you're growing, now people are moving in, now some people are getting displaced. That's another kind of problem that you have to work through. You can argue about which problem is better. I'd rather have the growth problem than the shrinking problem. Now, in that regard, this city's got about 169 square miles in it. It's got plenty of room to take care of a lot of people. And so one of the things that we're doing right now through government action, through zoning codes, rules and regulations, whether we give tax incentives or not tax incentives, when we rebuild what used to be called housing projects, which are now neighborhoods, whether it's Columbia Park or et cetera, is making sure that there are incentives in place for people to make the right decisions. Now, inherent in that is some people move in, some people move out. The word gentrification rate comes up, it goes down. What we're doing in the city is trying to find a way to manage that conflict so that everybody has an opportunity to come into this city. It's a very complicated issue. It's very difficult. It takes time. Some neighborhoods have come back faster than others. I don't think it's accurate.
Let me ask you a question. Why is the lower ninth, for instance, why is that so slow to come back?
Well, that's an excellent question. the federal government, the state government, the local governments, have money coming in. We have 73 neighborhoods in the city. Now, you won't be surprised that African Americans that don't live in the Ninth Ward, that want their neighborhood rebuilt, or wealthy people that live uptown, or wealthy people that live in New Orleans East, are saying, oh yeah, go give the Ninth Ward everything and then get to us later. Everybody's saying, give me my stuff now, and make sure that it's fair. And it's really not a racial argument. And it's not necessarily an equity argument. It's I want stuff in my neighborhood tomorrow, Mayor. And it's interesting because from neighborhood to neighborhood, I would say the one universal is get down blight fast. Because I don't like having an old nasty thing sitting next to the house that I'm in. Now, we've taken down more blight than any city in America quicker. But here's Tip O'Neill, all politics is local. It doesn't matter if we've taken it down faster than anywhere. If the one next door to the house, that's complaining is not down, you haven't done anything. So we have tried to manage the allocations of these resources by neighborhood and by need. General Honore really said this the best. When it gets hot, the poor get hotter. And when it gets cold, the poor get cold. The lower nine got hurt more. Before the storm happened, it was one of the poorest neighborhoods. We have spent $500 million in the lower Ninth Ward when you add it all up. Now, the lower Ninth Ward will say, well, you didn't give us as much as everybody else. That's not true per capita. They did, but they had much further to go. And the damage is so significant that it's going to take a lot more money to do it. I will remind you, though, because I feel like I'm on the side of begging here and demanding more. Just to give you all a metric, we had about $150 billion of damages in the city of New Orleans. I'm not talking about the Gulf Coast. I'm just talking about us. And we got about $71 billion in reimbursement. When you have that kind of gap, what happens is not everybody gets everything all the time, and you can't do everything all at once, and it takes more time. So I'm completely committed to the lower Ninth Ward, but I'm recommitted to every neighborhood in the city too, because there's middle nine, there's upper nine, there's 7th Ward, there's back of town, there's Pension Town, there's Gerd Town. A lot of neighborhoods have to get up, and when you don't have as much coming in as you need, it takes time to actually get it done. But the Ninth Ward will eventually give it back.
Let me turn to a subject that we spent a lot of time talking about, sure, which is violence. Obviously, homicide is down from its historically high levels, but you are seeing, and other cities are seeing, to be fair, you are seeing a spike in homicides. You have made this cause sort of the centerpiece of your administration. Why is homicide going back up right now, given all of the resources that you seem to be throwing at the issue of violence in the neighborhoods?
I'm apoplectic about this issue. This is an unacceptable state of affairs in the United States of America. Even though murder from 1996 has gone down from 30,000 to 15,000, the overwhelming per capita number of victims are African American men. And this is true all across America. And so this is something, as you know, we've been working on for a long time, and said that you cannot police your way. This is not you need more police officers so you can stop murder. That is not what this is. It is a much deeper job, and it actually folds into the entire thing that we are talking about, whether it's education, healthcare, jobs that we're talking about. It really is about whether or not the lives of young African American men matter in the United States of America, because this is a symptom, in my view, of the fact that we haven't really cared or focused, and we have lost our way in this country. So we have tried to develop a way of approaching this on the law enforcement side. The bad guys out there that are shooting and killing people right now. As we speak, the Ride or Die gang is being prosecuted in federal court. They're responsible for killing a lot of folks on the streets of New Orleans. We'll see how that works out. We've gone after gangs because you've got to stop them from hurting themselves and hurting other people. But you got to get on the front end of it too. In my view, and there are people in this room who know a lot more about this than I do because we're walking on the streets and living it all the time. When you see Breonna Allen's guts blown out, or Arabian Gales, or we're losing those young people who are kind of victims that weren't intended, and then the young men themselves, this is just something that I don't think the country can look away from.
But what's your analysis of why it's going up?
Nobody, here's the problem, nobody knows. I think that you saw, why is it happening all across the country at the same time? So if it was happening in New Orleans, actually our shootings are down this year for the first time in a long time. Last year when our murders were down, our shootings were up. So last year in this city, we recorded the lowest number of murders since 1971, but we had the highest number of shootings. This year, we had the lowest number of shootings, but our murder is back up to where it was last year, not to where it was before. So we're making some headway, but why? Nobody knows the answer to this. Why is the uptick happening in New Orleans, in Baltimore, in Chicago, even in Boston, which was actually leading the nation in this effort? And I think that this country is, somebody said that this wasn't a federal response. Homeland security and securing our nation is a federal responsibility in partnership with the state and local governments. And I think that we have left this issue as a country many, many times ago and have not put the resources necessary to get this done. And I think that if we double down on it and focus on it, we can make it happen. However, you got to get on the front side of this. Early childhood education, good parenting, making sure that the institutions of the school, the church, enrichment programs in the afternoon, because the light goes out with young kids about 7, 8, or 9 years old. And everybody that works in the community can see this. Once our young kids get to that point, they start seeing no sense of hope, no sense of future, no sense of anything. Then all of a sudden, they start careening off into a place where we don't want them to go.
You were, it was a very interesting answer. One word that I didn't hear that much was the word gun. Your friend, your very good friend, Michael Nutter, the mayor of Philadelphia, says, it's a pithy quote, he says, it's much easier to kill somebody with a gun than without a gun. Are guns a large piece of this for you, and is there anything you can do, anything the state can do about that?
Guns are a massive piece of it. There's no question about it. These kids now can get a gun. Well, you and I, we were in Angola together. We were talking to guys that were serving life. You asked them, was it the gun? And I think 3 of the guys in the room said, no, it wasn't the gun. It was me. It was my responsibility. And they said, but these kids today are much tougher than we were. But what I reminded him of, even though he said that, was these young men can now rent a gun. You can get a gun anywhere, like in any time. And so it is a massive problem. Now, the next question you asked me is a political question. What can you do about it? In the state of Louisiana, the state legislature has said you can't do anything about it. That's what they have said. And so one of the challenges that we have is how you, honor somebody's constitutional right, and then at the same time protect folks. I think, from my perspective, that there are a couple of things that we can do. One, when Sandy Hook happened, there was this big falderall about AK-47s. Most of the stuff happens on the streets in New Orleans with handguns. The horrific mass killings usually happen with a bigger gun. But Congress spent a lot of time just on AK-47s, not on handguns. One thing the federal government can do is have a direct action statute that allows them to prosecute people if they commit a felony with a gun. The federal government doesn't have that right now. It has to be something that's attendant to a drug offense, so they can change that. The second thing, and what worked in 1996, was putting 100,000 new police officers on the street with federal resources. So back in the day when we had our first decline, the city was receiving about $6-7 million a year to hire about 400 or 500 police officers. Now that worked all over the country because this was introduced by, I think, then Senator Biden and President Clinton. That actually worked because what happened is that it allowed police departments to actually get into the tough neighborhoods, do community policing, and added resources. So that helped. And then finally, it seems to me that even the NRA, can agree that we have good background checks and we keep guns out of the hands of convicted felons, people that are having very difficult issues with mental illness, et cetera, et cetera. But the country's really kind of come to a standstill on that. Unless and until Congress changes their mind and our state legislature allows cities like ours to do things, we're somewhat stuck on that issue. So I love my friend Mike Nutter. I don't really disagree with him about it, but the politics of the laws across the South are very different. I think that we can honor people's Second Amendment right, to bear arms under circumstances, but reasonable and thoughtful limitations, I think, that most people in the country agree with. But we cannot legally get there because of the strictures that we have on us by the state legislature.
Let me talk about another response to violent crime, and this is noticeable to any outsider who flies into New Orleans. You talk about beautiful new school buildings across New Orleans. There's a big, beautiful new building right off the highway, the new jail, the new parish jail.
It's insane.
Just repeat that in case anybody didn't hear you.
It's insane.
So talk to me about why I mean, you cannot jail your way out. If you believe that you cannot jail your way out of the homicide problem, then why is that jail there? Why is that?
That's a. You might want to ask somebody else that. Judge Africa or Marlon Guzman. But I'll give you my thought about this. First of all, it is very important that we secure the streets of New Orleans and we make things safe. There are bad people out there, for whatever reason, that will hurt themselves or hurt other people. And you have to have enough law enforcement to do that. But 56 to 60% of our budget is spent on the back end. Police officers, jails, et cetera, et cetera. That jail, remember I said Katrina and Rita didn't cause all of our problems. This is a perennial fight that's been going on between whoever's sitting in the seat that I sit in right now and whoever occupies the sheriff's office. That jail was declared unconstitutional at the request of the president's team at the Department of Justice. And we have to, if we're going to jail people, house them in a way that's consistent with their constitutional rights. That's fair. But we have this weird system where in this city where the sheriff gets to control the jail and the mayor has to pay for it. Whenever you have an attenuation...
Sounds like it's better to be the sheriff.
It is. Whenever you spend somebody else's money, it's better. Whenever you have any system of government that's set up where one person can spend the money and somebody else is responsible, right, for paying for it, you're gonna create a tension that doesn't exist, whether it's public safety or whatever. That's just a bad governing model, but that is what it is. The legislature ordained it that way, and we're going through it. As it was said, in this country right now, one of the things that we have gotten wrong is how to do incarceration and help our returning citizens come back home in a very significant way. You know this, the numbers. The recidivism rate is exponentially high. We jail more people in Louisiana than we jail, I think, anywhere else in the world per capita. And it hasn't worked out for us well because our crime rate, notwithstanding what you hear from people who do not live in the city, is terrible in New Orleans, but guess what? It's really bad in Shreveport. And guess what? Lake Charles, Lafayette, which has the highest juvenile crime rate in the state, Baton Rouge, this is a statewide problem. And by the way, it's a nationwide problem as well. Although people beat on New Orleans a lot, the numbers are that in Louisiana, we have always been a violent community. And so one of the things we've done without thinking about it, put people in jail, don't think about it, don't care about how much it costs, and all of a sudden when the budget for the Department of Correction goes from $200 million to, let's say, $800 million, money that otherwise could have been spent on early childhood education, enrichment programs, et cetera, everybody says, great, throw them up, lock them up, throw away the key. And what's happening is people are returning and doing more crime. So now what people in New Orleans, some folks on the other end of Broad Street, want to build a bigger thing. The advocates in this city have said, you know what, we can be tough and smart on crime. We can figure out that we don't have to arrest everybody for everything. Like if Clancy got pulled over and didn't have his driver's license, instead of taking him down to jail and putting him there for a day, we would give him a summons. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to, I know you never drive without your license. I know. So, and for minor offenses so that you can reduce the jail population, right, and make sure that we're spending less money on the back end, more money on the front end, and get a better result. And we've been fighting that fight. We're in federal court. Whenever you're under the thumb of a federal judge, they seem to be fairly powerful, and it takes a little time to work through those things.
We're going to go to questions from the audience in 1 second, but let me just ask you one final thing, and this relates both to this jail crisis, the incarceration issue, and innovation after Katrina.
Right.
I mean, you know, we went up to Angola recently together. It is before we got there, you told me that it'll bring me to my knees, and in many ways, the Angola will bring you to your knees. The highway literally ends. It's a one-way highway from New Orleans. It's a pipeline, and the highway literally ends at Angola, and there it is. 2,100 residents of New Orleans are permanent residents now of Angola. What post-Katrina innovations are you most pleased with in the city that is going to stop that pipeline? I mean, what are the specific things your administration has done that you think will actually cause that jail to be closed from disuse, and what is the thing that will actually reduce the population of people from New Orleans in Angola?
Well, first of all, it's not just my administration. The way things work down here is there's a lot of responsibility that's spread out over a bunch of different institutional frameworks. So whether it's the city of New Orleans or the school district, which the mayor doesn't run, whether it's the healthcare delivery system, which we don't control, the thing I'm most proud of is the level of coordination now between and amongst all of the different entities. And I call this the New Orleans way because it is literally true that nothing has happened in this city in the last 10 years without everybody having to participate in some form or fashion, because nobody's got everything that we need. So we can't get anything done if we don't wrap our arms around each other. Now, even though we don't have it right, even though there's some folks that are still left out, we all really are marching kind of in the right direction. And so the institutional changes, even though there's some concerns about the schools, that will eventually get itself worked out. But the image now in the city of New Orleans is people believe that every child not only has a right to a great education, but has to have an opportunity. And I don't think the school system's gone back to what it was before, which is where we had 73 to 80% of our schools failing. Now only 6% of our schools are failing. You guys got to think about this. Our graduation rate before Katrina was 50%. Now it's like it's 75%. It's higher than the country. Now, there is always, down on the ground at the family table, a lot of elbowing and a lot of stuff going on. But that is the single most important thing that we can do in this city, is make sure that the education system gets right and works right. The second thing that has to happen is we've got to really fight hard for early childhood education, because most of these kids that eventually go on to do very difficult things, you can tell very, very early on. The criminal justice reforms that we're working on right now, that we're making some great headway with in terms of partnering with the DA and the group violence reduction strategy and the multi-agency gang unit to actually go in and secure the neighborhoods, are important. But of course we need more resources. And then finally, the big danger that we have in this city is the further you get away from Katrina and the further out of stress you get and the further out of it's a life or death situation, we will have a tendency to go back into all the small little fights that we had and lose the overarching arc. So remember, I told you that this week was about three things. It was about commemorating and remembering. It was about saying thank you. This week for the people in New Orleans, for all of us, and by the way, there are tons of events that everybody in the city is invited to. There's an event on Saturday that's absolutely free, and this is really about the city. This week didn't happen by accident. We actually organized it so that we could all start talking. It's about what you want the city to look like into the future, and we're going to use the 300th anniversary, which is not too far away from now to then, to be thinking about how we as a community are going to keep the momentum up. And I'll end with this. One of the folks that were on this panel was said, how are we going to continue to be out in front? Well, guess what? This week is our out in front. You have 3 presidents of the United States coming back to see us. That's what's called being out in front. That's what's called using this week to tell our story about where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. And we should use the opportunity to actually seize the moment.
Let me interrupt you just for 1 minute. Tell us about one president in particular who's coming on Friday.
Yeah,
How
President
did that come
Bush.
about? Yes.
How
did that come about?
I invited him. I personally invited him because I think it's important, as we think about how this works, to get into an issue of healing and reconciliation. President Bush was the president when this event occurred. Everybody knows that the initial federal response was slow and it was inadequate. It took time to get our legs underneath us. We've gone through a couple of different mayors. We've gone through a couple of different governors. After the initial hiccup, we actually had to work together very closely over a couple of years period of time. And I just think it's really important for us to be gracious, to be thoughtful, to treat the president with dignity and respect, because he was our commander-in-chief at the time, and to say thank you to him. Nobody, by the way, not one of us in this room has been perfect. Not one of us in this room doesn't have something that we would say, whatever. But this was the United States of America, all of us together, not them against us, not us against them, not Republicans against Democrats, all of us coming together and putting down our jerseys. And I just think it's really important for the people of New Orleans to take a minute and to be very grateful and thankful to everybody and anybody who helped us, no matter how small or no matter how big. So I invited President Obama down. I invited President Bush, I invited President Clinton, and I am thrilled that all 3 of them have said that we are so important to them and to the rest of the world, not only in the past but in the future, that they've all said that they're going to come and help us remember all the folks that we lost and help us get to where we want to get in 2018.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're going to go to questions. If you just raise your hand, there's microphones.
And we have time for one very quick question.
One very quick question? Anybody have a very quick question?
Sorry.
She put her hand up most assertively, so she probably...
Hey, Allison.
I'm Allison Plyer with the Data Center.
Data Center.
You want to hold that?
Okay. Numbers lady.
There's a lot of work that we've all done, and a lot more that needs to be done, obviously, and you and I have had a lot of conversations, Mr. Mayor, and one thing I've never had the chance to ask you about was connectivity to the suburbs and to the outlying area for jobs. As we look at improving employment rates for African American men in particular, obviously we need training opportunities and increased awareness about job opportunities, and our data shows that there's a lot of really great opportunities upriver, and there will be more with coastal restoration projects, and it seems like the helping people connect to those jobs via transportation is a hurdle we have here, and I wonder what your thoughts are.
Well, first of all, a couple things. One of the things that we never did before the storm is that we never really counted anything in the city, so we really didn't know. And one of the things that we do now is count everything. We really did. It's hard to kind of look at the mirror at yourself. I mean, you may not mind, I mind. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? I mean, to really kind of look at yourself and analyze yourself and do a forensic study. This city has kind of stripped down and done that. And there's some things that we saw that we didn't like. So Allison's team is the one that actually put the number on. And does anybody wonder how many that is, by the way, 52%? Do you know? You want to know? It's 38,600 human beings that are not working. And so one of the things that we're doing, Ashley Gardia is leading this effort for us, is we're doing something called the Pathway to Prosperity, which is where we're actually trying to find the men, the individuals. Now, they're not all the same individual. They're different individuals. They're different ages. They live in different neighborhoods. They're at different parts of their life. Some of them didn't get through high school. Some of them got a GED. Some of them went to Delgado. Some of them graduated, et cetera, et cetera. And what we're trying to do, and by the way, we're terrible about this in America, all over the country, and I know Vice President Biden and President Obama are trying to work on this, is workforce development and training. Because in our schools, we're now saying, I want you to go to college. Not everybody's going to college. It's a great aspiration to have. Last year, some of our kids got $75 million in scholarships. It's 300 of the best universities. That's great. But a lot of our young men are not going to get there. This is what we have in Louisiana, though, which is a great opportunity. We've got the 2 medical centers coming out of the ground. We've got the rebuild of the sewage and water system. We're building, I think Lake Charles is building $60 billion worth of LNG plants. But everybody in the city knows, you know why we don't have transportation to and from? Because folks didn't want folks moving in and out of their neighborhoods. Right? Now, on the issue of race, that is changing dramatically because there's this huge need to have folks that are working for them. And so what we're trying to do is connect these young men with the jobs that exist and then create the pathway to them. The first and the most important pathway is not the bus. The first and the most important pathway is the training for the specific job. And so we're talking to all of the anchor institutions that are around, all the universities, all the medical centers, and say, look, you've got people living in your shadow that should be working in that building. There's no better example of this than the University Medical Center. If you go down Orleans Avenue right now, you walk right across the street from Dookie Chase's, you're going to see the new Lafitte housing development. Individuals that are growing up in that new housing, which is better than there was before, should be able to walk down the street 3 blocks and walk into that medical center and do a whole plethora of jobs, depending on what their skill set is. And that's something from as simple as being a phlebotomist, to being a med tech, to being a nurse, to doing diagnostics, to being the doctor, to being the person that actually runs the place. And so my vision and my hope and my dream is that in a couple of years in New Orleans, that pathway will be easy, it'll be seamless, and the people that actually live in the neighborhoods will actually be running those major institutions. That's what a beautiful New Orleans would look like in a couple of years.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much for talking
Thank
to us.
all of you.
We appreciate it.
Have a great week.
Thank you. Thank you.